Isla Marquez was a young Filipina cruise worker chasing a better life. Sheikh Rami al-Harun was a powerful Dubai businessman drowning in secrets. Soraya Khalil was the loyal assistant who knew too much. Captain Elias Navarro was the silent witness trapped by duty, and Detective Karim Dastan was the investigator determined to untangle the lies. Together, their lives collided on a luxury yacht where a forbidden affair spiraled into a shocking murder that stunned the world. Isla Marquez had grown up in a small coastal town in the Philippines, where the sea was both a friend and a reminder of how far dreams could drift. Her childhood was simple, surrounded by narrow streets, family meals cooked over open fires, and days spent working to help her mother manage the household. The ocean called to her in a way that was both comforting and haunting. She knew the only way to change her life was to leave everything familiar behind and step into the unknown. When she was offered a contract as a cruise ship worker, she accepted without hesitation, believing it would be her escape from poverty and a chance to provide for her family. She boarded the ship with nothing but a small suitcase, a prayer in her heart, and a determination to survive. Life on the cruise ship was not easy. The hours were long, and the expectations from supervisors and wealthy passengers were heavy. Isla often worked until her body ached, smiling even when exhaustion made her want to collapse. Yet the ship was its own world, where stories unfolded each day and nights shimmered under dazzling lights. It was there she first saw Sheikh Rami al-Harun, a man whose presence seemed to command the space around him. He was not loud or boastful, but every glance he gave, every movement he made, spoke of wealth and control. Guests whispered his name with curiosity and envy, describing his empire in Dubai and the power he held among the region's elite. For Isla, Rami was untouchable. She kept her distance, lowering her eyes whenever she passed him in the dining hall or corridors. But Rami noticed her. Perhaps it was the way she carried herself, quiet but graceful, or the way her smile seemed genuine even when surrounded by opulence she could never share. Their first encounters were subtle, an extra moment of eye contact, a pause in conversation as he let his gaze linger on her. Slowly, what had once been routine workdays turned into something more dangerous. Rami began requesting Isla by name for his service whenever possible. The other staff noticed but said nothing, accustomed to powerful men bending rules aboard luxury ships. At first, Isla told herself it was harmless. She needed to keep her job, and if it meant serving a wealthy guest more often, then she would do so with professionalism. But Rami's interest deepened. He found excuses to speak to her alone, to ask about her life, her family, her dreams. Isla, unaccustomed to such attention from a man of his stature, felt a mixture of fear and flattery. Nights at sea became filled with stolen moments. He would leave small gifts for her to find, jewelry discreetly wrapped, notes slipped between linens, promises written in ink. She resisted at first, knowing how dangerous such a connection could be, but the world Rami painted for her was unlike anything she had ever known. He spoke of villas in Dubai, of private gardens hidden from prying eyes, of a life where she would never have to work again. For a young woman who had known only struggle, the temptation was overwhelming. Yet beneath the glamour was an unspoken truth. Rami's world was built on rules Isla could never truly belong to. His reputation was carefully guarded, his every move scrutinized by those who lived in wealth and tradition. To them, Isla would never be more than a passing indulgence, a secret kept in shadows. She knew this, but she let herself believe in him anyway, convincing herself that love could overcome boundaries. The secrecy only fueled the intensity. They arranged clandestine meetings in quiet corners of the ship, where the hum of engines masked their presence. To others, Isla was still the hard-working staff member, but behind closed doors she was the forbidden lover of a man whose influence stretched across nations. Each moment carried risk, yet it also carried a thrill neither could resist. But as days turned to weeks, the stakes grew higher. Isla began to notice the watchful eyes of other staff, the careful way Rami's assistant lingered nearby, the subtle tension whenever his name was spoken. She realized their affair was no longer invisible. Whispers were forming in corridors and questions were being asked without answers. What had begun as secret admiration was turning into something dangerous, something that could not remain hidden forever. For Isla, the sea no longer symbolized freedom. It became a reminder of how trapped she was between two worlds, the humble life she had left behind and the dangerous luxury she now found herself in. And though she tried to silence her fears, she felt an unease growing with every wave that struck the hull of the ship. She had stepped into a story much larger than herself, and there was no way back to the simple life she once knew. Sheikh Rami's invitation came months after their secret meetings on the cruise ship had begun, and Isla Marquez could hardly believe what she was hearing. The promise was not another stolen moment in a dim corridor or a hurried exchange between duties, but an entire weekend with him on his private yacht in Dubai. To Isla, the idea felt like stepping into a dream she had no right to touch. She had never even seen a vessel of such luxury before, and now she was being asked to board one as a guest, not as staff. Her heart wavered between excitement and dread. She knew this was not a simple invitation. It was a test of loyalty and silence. If she agreed, she would be pulled deeper into a life she did not fully understand. If she refused, she feared losing the only connection that had made her feel seen since leaving her home. The yacht was prepared under the command of Captain Elias Navarro, a man who had spent decades navigating waters for the wealthy. He was quiet and competent, but he was not blind. He had seen men like Sheikh Rami before, men who carried secrets aboard ships and left others to bear the weight of them. Elias oversaw the polishing of railings, the stocking of rare wines, and the meticulous detail required to impress a man who already owned everything. To him, the guest list was short, but what mattered more was the tension he sensed in the air. This was not a casual journey. It carried an energy of something hidden, something dangerous. Among those working closest to Rami was Soraya Khalil, his personal assistant. Soraya had managed his affairs for years, arranging travel, shielding him from scandals, and ensuring his reputation remained untarnished. She was sharp, observant, and fiercely protective of his name. When she learned of Isla's presence, she masked her concern with practiced indifference, but inside she felt unease. Soraya had covered up many things for Rami, extravagant indulgences, questionable decisions, but this affair was different. The girl was not like others she had seen come and go. She was not part of Rami's world, and that made her dangerous. When Isla finally stepped onto the yacht, her eyes widened at the gleaming deck and the lavish interior. It was unlike anything she had imagined while growing up by the simple shores of her hometown. Marble floors, velvet cushions, chandeliers that swayed slightly with the motion of the sea. It was a palace floating on water. She felt small in its corridors, out of place, yet she carried herself with quiet grace. To Rami, this contrast between her innocence and the extravagance around her only deepened his obsession. As the yacht sailed from the harbor, Isla tried to silence the unease that gnawed at her. She told herself this was love, that she had been chosen, that her sacrifices and risks were leading her somewhere better. Yet in the reflection of the glass windows, she sometimes caught Soraya's eyes fixed on her with a sharpness that felt more like warning than curiosity. Soraya spoke little, but her presence reminded Isla that she was an intruder in a story that was not hers to claim. Days passed in indulgence. Exotic meals were prepared, music drifted over the decks, and Rami wrapped Isla in promises that painted pictures of a life far beyond her reach. Still, the atmosphere was fragile. Rami's mood shifted easily, turning from charm to silence, from warmth to suspicion. He spoke of enemies who watched him, of the dangers of being discovered, of people who would never forgive him if the truth came to light. Isla began to understand that their love was not a secret romance, but a dangerous rebellion against expectations that carried consequences she was unprepared to face. Captain Elias noticed the quiet strain. He watched the way Isla lingered on the deck alone, staring at the horizon as though searching for a way back to safety. He observed the tightness in Rami's gestures, the way Soraya remained close but never comfortable. Years of experience had taught him to recognize when a voyage carried more than passengers. It carried burdens, hidden and heavy. But his duty was to the man who paid him, and loyalty came at a cost. By the end of the second day, Isla realized the yacht was both a marvel and a prison. Its walls sparkled with luxury, but they also confined her. There was no escape once they had set sail, no way to step off without Rami's permission. The sun blazed over the water, but she felt a chill in her chest that no warmth could erase. The dream she thought she was living began to twist into something else. A story where each moment of happiness was shadowed by the possibility of betrayal. She had crossed into a world where power could erase truth, and where her heart was no longer only her own to protect. The first hours of the voyage felt like a continuation of the promises Isla Marquez had been given. But by the second evening, a change in atmosphere could be felt across the yacht. The vessel itself glided smoothly under the command of Captain Elias Navarro, cutting through the Arabian waters with ease. Yet something heavier than the ocean breeze weighed over everyone aboard. To Isla, it seemed as if the yacht was a dream that constantly threatened to turn into a nightmare. The luxury was dazzling. The meals prepared by world-class chefs, the suites lined with gold accents, the endless view of sea stretching beyond the horizon, but none of it could drown out the unease that settled inside her. Sheikh Rami's mood shifted with the tide. At times, he would shower Isla with affection, speaking of futures that shimmered like mirages, of villas where no one could judge them, of a life built on beauty and secrecy. Other times he became silent, distant, his eyes clouded with worry as though he carried enemies within his own mind. He would glance at his phone repeatedly, step away to take calls in hushed tones, and return with a tightened jaw. Isla began to sense that she was not the only reason for his unease, but she could not ignore the way his paranoia grew stronger whenever their relationship was mentioned. Soraya Khalil, always close yet never fully engaged, continued her quiet vigilance. She managed schedules, answered messages, and ensured that every request was fulfilled, but her gaze often drifted toward Isla. There was no open hostility in her look, but there was no warmth either. Soraya was the one who understood most clearly what was at stake, and she seemed to carry the weight of consequences before they even arrived. Her silence was louder than any words could be, a warning that Isla had entered a place where love was no longer private, but a risk to survival. Captain Elias kept to his duties, charting the course, instructing his small crew, and ensuring that the Sheikh's yacht projected perfection. Yet his years of experience made him attuned to the undercurrents aboard. He noticed the tension in Rami's gestures, the way Isla lingered on the upper deck alone for long stretches, staring into the sea as though measuring its depth. He saw the unease etched in her face when Rami's tone sharpened suddenly, and he knew from instinct that this journey was not only about leisure. Elias told himself his role was to steer the ship and nothing more. But a gnawing thought began to settle that he was guiding something far more dangerous than passengers through calm waters. For Isla, each day became a pendulum swinging between moments of enchantment and moments of fear. When Rami was kind, she allowed herself to believe in the picture he painted, a life of love, security, and comfort. When his suspicion returned, she felt the trap close around her. She began to realize that every choice she had made had pulled her further from safety. The yacht, with all its beauty, was in truth a cage without escape. Even the sea, wide and free, offered no salvation, for she had nowhere to go if she tried to flee. As the weekend unfolded, Isla noticed small details that unsettled her. Locked doors she was told never to open, crew members who avoided her gaze, whispers that ceased the moment she stepped into a room. It was as if the yacht itself held secrets within its walls, secrets she was never meant to discover. She felt like a guest and yet a prisoner, celebrated and yet concealed. Each night, as the waves rocked the vessel, her mind raced with questions she dared not speak aloud. Rami's words became more contradictory. He spoke of protecting her, yet reminded her of the danger of exposure. He promised her freedom, yet kept her within the confines of the yacht. His affection could turn to coldness in a heartbeat, leaving Isla uncertain of what awaited her from one moment to the next. The more she tried to understand him, the more she saw the fractures beneath the polished image. He was a man consumed by the fear of losing control, and she was the spark threatening to ignite it. By the third night, the tension was undeniable. The air seemed heavier, the laughter more forced, the silence sharper. Isla sensed that something was drawing near, something inevitable that no luxury or promise could prevent. She had entered a world built on power and secrecy, and every hour aboard the yacht pulled her deeper into its shadows. What had once seemed like a fairy tale escape had become a dangerous voyage, and although the sea stretched endlessly around them, she felt there was no way to steer her life back to shore. The final night aboard the yacht began with a calm that felt almost unnatural, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. The vessel lay anchored under a canopy of stars, the glow of Dubai's distant skyline fading into the horizon. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The crew moved quietly, aware that the mood among the guests had shifted. There was little conversation, only the clinking of glasses and the faint hum of music meant to mask the silence. Isla Marquez felt the weight of it pressing down on her, a sense of dread she could not shake. She had told herself she was ready to live with the risks of her love. But deep inside, she knew something dangerous was approaching. Sheikh Rami al-Haroun had spent much of the evening pacing, his temper flaring and calming in unpredictable waves. One moment he was affectionate, brushing Isla's hand and promising her a future away from the chaos of the world, and the next he was restless, his eyes narrowing as if replaying threats only he could hear. He drank more than usual, a rare crack in his carefully controlled image, and each glass seemed to draw out a darker edge of his personality. His assistant Soraya Khalil lingered nearby, watching silently, her presence sharp and uneasy. She understood that nights like this were when mistakes were made, mistakes that could not be hidden forever. Captain Elias Navarro remained on the deck, staring out into the dark waters, but his mind was not on the course of the ship. He had seen enough wealthy men unravel to recognize the signs. He did not know what words were exchanged behind the closed doors of the luxury cabin, but he knew their echoes would carry consequences. A captain's duty was to ensure the safety of everyone aboard, yet Elias felt powerless, bound by loyalty and fear of the man who owned the yacht. Behind the locked door of her cabin, Isla sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she listened to Rami's footsteps pacing across the floor. Their conversation had shifted from whispered promises to sharp accusations. He accused her of doubting him, of not appreciating the risks he was taking for her. She tried to calm him, tried to assure him that she only wanted their love to survive, but her words seemed to fuel his suspicion. The walls felt closer with every passing second, the air heavy with the clash of fear and passion. When the breaking point came, it was sudden and brutal. The sound of shattering glass pierced the night, followed by a struggle that left the cabin in chaos. Furniture was overturned, curtains ripped, and the glint of broken shards scattered across the carpet. The fight was desperate, Isla trying to resist, and Rami consumed by rage he could no longer control. Her screams were muffled by the closed door, drowned out by the hum of the yacht's engines and the silence of those who had learned to ignore what they could not change. When the noise finally ceased, the stillness was deafening. Isla's lifeless body lay motionless on the floor, her dreams extinguished in an instant. Bruises marked her struggle, her final resistance against the man she once believed would save her from hardship. Rami stood over her, breathing heavily, his expression a mask of shock and fury. For a moment he seemed to realize the enormity of what he had done, but the weight of his pride and fear crushed any chance of remorse. Soraya entered minutes later, her face pale as she took in the scene. She said nothing, but her eyes told the story of someone who had been expecting this end long before it arrived. Without a word, she moved to cover the evidence, to erase what could be erased, because she knew her own survival depended on it. Captain Elias was summoned, his loyalty tested as he stood in the room, staring at the irreversible crime. His orders were clear: clean the cabin, remove the signs of struggle, ensure that the world never learned what had truly happened aboard that yacht. The crew whispered their theories when the body was discovered. Some were told she had slipped, others were convinced she had taken her own life, crushed by despair. But the truth was visible in the details. broken glass, marks of resistance, and the silence of those who had witnessed more than they would admit. The yacht, once a symbol of wealth and indulgence, had become a crime scene adrift in the sea, carrying a secret darker than any storm. When dawn broke over the water, the vessel sailed back toward Dubai with a grim calm. Rami spoke little, presenting himself as a grieving man struck by tragedy, while Soraya disappeared from sight, and Elias buried his conscience beneath obedience. Aisla's body, once full of hope, was now evidence of how power could twist love into violence and turn a promise of paradise into a cage of death. Detective Karim Dastan was called to the harbor the morning the yacht returned, his reputation for thoroughness making him the natural choice for a case already shrouded in secrecy. From the moment he stepped aboard, he sensed something was amiss. The crew moved with unnatural stiffness, their eyes avoiding his, their voices measured as if rehearsed. The cabin where Isla Marquez's body had been found had already been cleaned, the sheets replaced, the furniture straightened. Only the faint trace of broken glass beneath the carpet and a lingering metallic smell in the air suggested that violence had occurred. Karim had seen this kind of concealment before. Wealth often erased truth, but not completely. The details always left shadows. Rami presented himself as a grieving lover, his words carefully chosen to paint Isla's death as a tragic accident. He spoke of how she had been fragile, how the pressures of her life had overwhelmed her, how he had tried to protect her. To those unfamiliar with deceit, he might have sounded sincere, but Karim's instincts told him otherwise. The Sheikh's pauses were calculated, his grief too polished, as if each sentence had been practiced before a mirror. Soraya Khalil remained invisible in those first hours, her absence louder than any testimony. Captain Elias Navarro, when questioned, kept his answers clipped and vague, speaking only of schedules and technical details of the voyage. His eyes, however, betrayed unease, a flicker of conscience buried beneath loyalty. Karim began piecing together the timeline, noting inconsistencies in every version of events. The crew swore they had heard nothing unusual, but one sailor admitted in hushed tones that a scream had pierced the night before, quickly falling silent. Another mentioned glasses being shattered, though he insisted it must have been an accident. Slowly, fragments of truth surfaced through contradictions. Isla's bruises did not match the story of a fall, and her injuries suggested struggle. The detective ordered a full forensic examination, and the evidence painted a clearer picture. She had fought back against someone far stronger. Financial records added a new layer to the case. Karim discovered that shortly before her death, Isla had been linked to a hidden bank account in Dubai under an alias. The deposits were traced back to a shell company connected to Rami's network, money funneled discreetly in amounts too large for an ordinary worker. To the detective, this revealed a relationship far deeper than the Sheikh admitted. Isla had been kept close, supported financially, yet not acknowledged publicly. This arrangement suggested control rather than care, and Karim wondered if she had demanded more than Rami was willing to give. The search for Soraya Khalil led investigators across borders. She had left Dubai abruptly after the yacht docked, vanishing into Oman under a false identity. When she was eventually located weeks later, her silence cracked under the weight of interrogation. Soraya admitted she had long feared the relationship would end in disaster. She described Rami's obsession, his temper, and the way Isla had begun pressing for security, threatening to reveal the affair if her demands were ignored. Soraya did not witness the murder directly, but she confirmed the cover-up. She had been ordered to erase evidence, to control the narrative before authorities arrived. Captain Elias, faced with mounting pressure, finally broke his silence as well. His testimony was cautious but damning, describing the state of the cabin when he first entered, the overturned furniture, the marks on Isla's body. He confessed to cleaning at Rami's request, torn between his duty as a captain and his fear of defying the man who paid his wages. His words reinforced what the forensic evidence had already shown. Isla had not slipped, and she had not chosen her fate. The case that followed shook the city's elite circles. In Dubai's courts, the name of Sheikh Rami Al Haroun had always been one of influence and untouchable power, but the weight of evidence pressed heavily against him. International attention magnified every detail, turning Isla's story into a symbol of how wealth and secrecy could destroy those with no power to defend themselves. Rami's defense claimed the death was accidental, a moment of tragedy misinterpreted, yet Soraya's testimony, combined with the captain's reluctant confession, painted a far darker reality. The trial ended with a conviction that few believed possible, a rare fracture in the shield of privilege. Rami was sentenced, though debates about the fairness of the punishment lingered. Some argued he had received less than he deserved, while others whispered that even this outcome was extraordinary given who he was. For Isla, justice had come too late to save her life, but her story refused to fade into silence. Her name became a reminder of what happens when desire collides with power, when promises of freedom become chains, and when love, forbidden and fragile, is twisted into violence. The yacht that once shimmered as a floating palace would forever be remembered as the place where truth could not be buried, no matter how deep the sea or how powerful the man who tried to hide it.